alone, no chaperone can get our number. The world's in slumber, let's misbehave. There's something wild about you, child, that's so contagious. Let's be outrageous, let's misbehave.
Stephen C. Smith, as I mentioned, he is a film historian, national speaker, author of the definitive Max Steiner biography, Music by Max Steiner, The Epic Life of Hollywood's Most Influential Composer. He also is an expert on Bernard Herrmann and author of A Heart That Fires Center, The Life and Music of Bernard Herrmann, which of course was especially fascinating, the insights that he provided us with at our screening of Vertigo. And Stephen C. Smith is a 4-time Emmy-nominated producer of over 200 documentaries, and just an all-around great guy who we're very happy to have today. So thank you again, everyone. Come on up.
Arsenic and Olays is not only a great screwball comedy, but I think it's a very unusual one in the way it mixes slapstick comedy and rapid-fire dialogue we love from this genre with rather dark humor, especially for 1941 when it was shot. And the manic energy that Cary Grant brings to the screen is partly a reflection of what was going on behind the scenes, which I will talk about briefly. In 1941, the director of this film, Frank Capra, was the best-known director in America. He had already made such classics as It Happened One Night, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He had won 3 Academy Awards for Best Director in the 1930s, and one of those was for an adaptation of a Broadway hit called You Can't Take It With You. Well, in August of 1941, after making a lot of sort of message-themed pictures, Capra again turned to Broadway for the film we are about to see, which appealed to him partly because it was not a message picture. It is a pure fun picture. Arsenic and Olays had opened as a play on the Great White Way in January of 1941. The credited playwright, as you will see, is a man named Joseph Kesselring, but the play was actually heavily rewritten and revised and greatly improved by its producers, the team of Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss. And if those names are familiar, it's because they had already written the Broadway smash Life with Father, later to become a Warner Brothers film as well. As for what this is about, well, I think most of you know, and if you don't, I will just say that the original name of Joseph Kesselring's play was Bodies in Our Cellar. The screenplay for this movie was given to 2 brothers, Philip and Julius Epstein, and they would follow this with another Warner Brothers movie you may have seen named Casablanca. They had a great sense of humor, and they did a terrific job really retaining the Lindsay and Krauss Kesselring play. But anytime they go outside the setting of the house, that's pretty much the material that they added. Cary Grant, surprisingly, was reportedly, according to some sources, Frank Capra's 3rd choice to star in this film. Anyone want to guess who was first or second? Bob Hope and Jack Benny. Cary Grant was the hottest leading man in Hollywood without question after a string of hits like The Awful Truth and Holiday and His Girl Friday the year before, but he was also very expensive and a freelancer. Frank Capra got him for this movie at a salary of $160,000, which doesn't sound bad until you realize that in 1941, well, the equivalent today is $3.5 million. The British-born actor donated about 2/3 of that salary to World War II charities. That was not only a very patriotic act, but it was a shrewd business one, because by donating that money, he actually got to keep more of it for himself. He had made so much money that year. It was a great deduction, as well as a good thing to do for the war effort. And of course, this was before America was in the war. It was really Britain leading the fight at the time, so that was a substantial contribution to the war effort. In the film, he is joined on screen by 3 members of the original Broadway cast. Those would be Jean Adair and Josephine Hull as the aunts, and John Alexander, who plays Teddy. If you know who Teddy is, you know. If you don't, you'll find out. 8 weeks were scheduled for the shoot, which was a tight schedule, but the play's producers, Lindsay and Krauss, insisted that the 3 actors borrowed from the Broadway play had to be back in that play on Broadway in 8 weeks, because in the stage version, really, Jean Adair and Josephine Hull were the stars. They had the most important roles, and Lindsay and Krauss made it clear that there would be no extensions for them because they wanted to keep this play running while the movie was being made. Well, right from the start, there was conflict on the set, and a lot of it was between Frank Capra and Cary Grant, because Capra wanted Grant to play things big, very big, and Grant wasn't comfortable with that. He later said, "I tried to explain to Capra that I couldn't do that kind of comedy, all those double takes. I'd have been better as one of the old aunts." Which is a rather curious remark when you think of the great double takes he had just done in His Girl Friday, but anyway. Capra believed he could not play a farce too broadly, and he assured Cary Grant that they could do all the retakes they wanted once principal photography was done. They put the film together and look at it, so fine. Well, things did not get smoother. Filming started later than expected on October 20th of 1941, and the shoot started slipping behind schedule because contrary to the way most movies are made, especially at a thrifty studio like Warner Brothers, Capra insisted that the movie be shot in sequence. So there's a cab driver you see. Most studios would have shot the cab driver's part in 2 days. Capra had him on for just about the whole movie because he keeps popping up. And because Frank Capra was Frank Capra, the Warner Brothers just kind of said, okay, that's the way you're going to do it. And the other problem was these ongoing debates between Cary Grant and Capra about how big to play the role of Mortimer, Cary Grant's role. Well, then things really changed after December 7th of 1941. After Pearl Harbor, the very next day, Frank Capra enlisted in the military, even though the movie was not yet finished. And he just wanted to get into the war effort and do whatever the government wanted him to do, which ended up being make propaganda films. He tried to postpone the rest of the filmmaking, but the brothers Warner said, absolutely not. We want to open this movie the day after that play closes on Broadway, so we need to finish this now. And that was a great motivator for Capra to pick up the schedule, and he rushed, he moved fast. He moved so quickly that this movie finished production, finished shooting on December 13th of 1941, under budget, but with no time for those promised retakes with Cary Grant, because Cary Grant had to go to another movie, and Capra was going to war, and the ladies were going back to the play. So the movie was the movie that they shot. The editing and the scoring also had to be done at light speed because the film had to be finished by a certain date for Warner Brothers to make a tax deadline. And trust me, you do not need to know about movie tax deadlines. There's just a reason that a lot of movies then had to be finished by a certain date. So this had to be wrapped up fast. And that deadline meant that the film's Oscar-winning composer, the great Max Steiner, had to race to write this score, something he was very used to doing and doing well. And his score is really, I think, wonderful in balancing the more sinister aspects of the movie with the comic ones, and even the romantic ones. And comedy music is the hardest to write, in my opinion, because you don't want to be funny. As soon as the music is funny with a funny scene, it tends to kill it. So Steiner brings a lightness to those scenes that very much reflected his own buoyant, joking, pun-loving personality. And I just want to give you a couple little things to listen for in the score, if you so choose. He had a good starting point in that there's a little song sung in the film called There Is a Happy Land. And you'll understand why when you see the film, if you don't recall. Well, that was an actual song from the 19th century. And Max uses it pretty much as a theme for the two aunts. He has another charming little theme for them, but he uses There Is a Happy Land all throughout the score, including the main title. And he also does something very clever with the characters of Cary Grant and Priscilla Lane. It's no spoiler to say that they are married in the film because it's scene 2 of the movie that they get married. And at first we hear the Wagner wedding march and the other score, da-dum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum. Well, then as Cary Grant gets enmeshed in all the things he gets enmeshed in, and Priscilla Lane keeps popping up and trying to get back in his life again, Max gives them a romantic theme, and it goes, ba-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-dum. Well, that's the wedding march turned upside down. And I think it's brilliant, because not only does it subliminally remind us that this is an eager bride and groom trying to get away, but it's also a clever concept because their wedding has been turned upside down by the circumstances. And I bet he didn't even instinctively, intellectually think that. He just came upon that intuitively. And the last thing I'll say about the music is that for the more sinister, even horror scenes, he plays those straight. His music could be from the film noir titles that he later scored at Warner Brothers. Although he does add, when the villain played by Raymond Massey comes in, he gives us a queasy version of There's No Place Like Home, which sounds very sinister in this context. I think it's a wonderful score. And lastly, look for Max Steiner's credit in the opening titles, because he gets a very good one. Well, after all that rushing during filming and afterwards, when did Arsenic and Old Lace premiere? It opened nearly 3 years after it was made. Because Warner Brothers had made a deal that the movie would not open until the play closed on Broadway. And in those days, that meant a few months, fine. They figured it would be their big movie of 1942. Well, it turned out to be their big movie of September 1944. By which time, Priscilla was almost out of the movie business. She made 2 more films and retired. Nevertheless, it was a great, great success. As for Cary Grant's performance, I leave it to you. You can decide who is right, Cary or Capra. I tend to agree with Cary Grant's wonderful biographer, Scott Eyman, who wrote, Grant's performance is a whirling dervish of ascending comic panic, inventive and dazzling in technique. I'll have more to say about the film, very happily in conversation with Aliece. But for now, sit back, imagine yourself drinking a nice glass of elderberry wine, and enjoy Arsenic and Old Lace.
We're all alone, no chaperone, can't get our number. The world's in slumber, let's misbehave. There's something wild about you, child, that's so contagious. Let's be outrageous, let's misbehave. When Adam won Eve's hand, he wouldn't stand for teasing. He didn't care about those apples out of season. They say the spring means just one thing to little lovebirds.